My name is Harper Mitchell, and the first time I realized my family would never see me the way they saw my sister, I was 12 years old. I had just brought home a perfect report card. Straight A's in every subject. My math teacher wrote that I was one of the brightest students she had taught in 20 years. My science teacher said I had a gift for solving problems most adults struggled to understand. I remember carrying that report card into the kitchen with both hands, heart racing with excitement. My father, Robert Mitchell, was reading the newspaper at the table. My mother, Linda Mitchell, was helping my older sister Vanessa prepare for a local pageant. I handed him the report card and waited. He looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then he nodded once. Good job. I smiled. Really? Of course. He folded the paper and handed it back. But you should learn to be more outgoing like Vanessa. Intelligence only gets you so far. That was it. No celebration. No excitement. No pride. Just a reminder that I wasn't Vanessa. Looking back, that moment explained almost everything that followed. Vanessa was 3 years older than me and seemed born understanding things I never did. She knew how to make people laugh. She knew how to command attention. She could walk into a room and somehow become the center of it within minutes. My parents adored that about her. Every achievement became a family event. Dance competitions. Beauty pageants. School elections. Talent shows. The walls of our house slowly filled with photographs documenting every milestone of her life. Meanwhile, I preferred laboratories to parties. I liked books more than social events. I found comfort in equations because equations were honest. They either worked or they didn't. There were no favorites in mathematics. No popularity contests in biology. Just facts. Facts made sense. Families did not. By the time I graduated high school at the top of my class, I had already accepted my role. Vanessa was the star. I was the reliable backup character. Not unloved exactly. Just overlooked. There is a difference. My grandmother Eleanor was the only person who seemed to notice. You're going to do something important one day, she told me when I was 17. We were sitting on her front porch eating peach pie while the rest of the family attended one of Vanessa's events. How do you know? I asked. Grandma Eleanor smiled. Because you care about things that matter. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Years later, I would. I attended Duke University and eventually earned a master's degree in biomedical engineering. Those years were some of the hardest and most rewarding of my life. While other students spent weekends relaxing, I spent mine in research labs. While most people slept, I studied. Every accomplishment felt earned. Every success belonged entirely to me. During my final year, I completed a research project involving advanced cardiac sensor technology. My advisor called it groundbreaking. The university invited me to present my findings at a national conference. For the first time, I felt like I was building something meaningful. 3 months before graduation, I mailed invitations to my family. I called to remind them. I texted dates. I even emailed schedules. I wanted them there. Not because I needed validation. Because I was still hoping. Graduation morning arrived bright and warm. Students filled the campus. Families crowded every walkway carrying flowers and balloons. Proud parents posed for photographs. Excited grandparents hugged graduates through tears. I looked toward the section where my family was supposed to sit. 4 reserved seats. Empty. I checked my phone. No messages. No calls. Nothing. 20 minutes before the ceremony started, my father finally called. Sweetheart, I'm sorry. Immediately, I knew. You aren't coming. A major client meeting came up. His voice sounded distracted. I tried to move it. No, he hadn't. We both knew that. Okay. Don't be upset. I'm not. That part was a lie. He promised we would celebrate later. We never did. 10 minutes after hanging up, my mother texted. Migraine. Sorry, honey. Take pictures. That was all. No call. No explanation. Just a text message. Vanessa didn't contact me at all. When the ceremony began, I walked across the stage alone. Thousands of people filled the auditorium. Families cheered. Cameras flashed. I accepted my diploma and smiled for photographs. Then I looked toward the audience again. 3 empty seats. But not 4. Sitting in the front row was my grandmother Eleanor. 82 years old. She had arranged transportation herself and traveled nearly 3 hours to be there. The moment she saw me, she stood using her cane and clapped louder than anyone in the building. Tears filled my eyes immediately. Afterward, she hugged me and whispered, I wouldn't have missed this for anything. That evening, I learned my parents hadn't missed the ceremony because of emergencies. My mother had spent the day at a spa with Vanessa. Social media confirmed it. Matching robes. Matching smiles. Matching captions about mother-daughter bonding time. While I crossed a stage they couldn't bother attending. That should have been the moment I stopped hoping. It wasn't. Hope is stubborn. Especially when family is involved. A year later, my career brought me to Austin, Texas, for a medical technology conference. I was presenting research related to cardiac imaging systems. During a lunch break, I wandered into a session about artificial intelligence in healthcare. The speaker was a man named Ethan Cross. He wore jeans, work boots, a simple blue button-down shirt. Nothing about him suggested wealth or status. He spoke passionately about improving patient outcomes through technology. Not profits. Not market share. Patients. After the presentation ended, I asked a question about imaging accuracy in complex cardiac cases. Most speakers would have given a quick answer and moved on. Ethan spent 40 minutes discussing it with me. By the end of the conversation, we had completely forgotten lunch. As I walked back toward my hotel that afternoon, I had no idea I had just met the man who would change my life. I also had no idea that years later, the same family who ignored my biggest achievements would call my wedding embarrassing, right before discovering who Ethan Cross really was. Meeting Ethan Cross should have felt extraordinary from the beginning. Looking back now, people always ask if I knew who he really was when we first met. The answer is simple. No. If I had known, our entire relationship probably would have unfolded differently. The reason we connected so easily was because neither of us approached the conversation with expectations. I saw a thoughtful man passionate about improving healthcare. He saw a biomedical engineer who genuinely cared about solving problems. That was it. No titles. No status. No assumptions. Just 2 people talking. After the conference ended, we exchanged phone numbers. I expected the occasional professional conversation. Instead, we talked almost every day. At first, it was about work, research, technology, medical innovation. Then the conversations became longer. We discussed books, travel, childhood memories, personal goals. Somehow, without either of us noticing, friendship quietly transformed into something more. 6 months later, Ethan flew to Seattle for what he claimed was a business meeting. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. He stayed for 4 days. On the second evening, we walked along the waterfront near Pike Place Market. Rain fell lightly across the city. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay beneath gray skies. Ethan stopped walking and looked at me. Can I tell you something? I smiled. Sure. I think I've been looking forward to this trip more than any business meeting in my life. I laughed. That's probably not good for your career. It's terrible for my career. He smiled back. but very good for my happiness. That was the moment everything changed. 3 years later, I still remembered the exact expression on his face. The sincerity. The warmth. The complete absence of pretense. Ethan never tried to impress people. That was one of the first things I loved about him. He drove a pickup truck. Wore simple clothes. Preferred small restaurants over expensive ones. He seemed completely uninterested in the status games that dominated so many people's lives. Unfortunately, my parents interpreted those qualities very differently. The first time Ethan met my family was during Thanksgiving. By then we had been dating almost 18 months. I was nervous. Not because of Ethan. Because of my parents. Experience had taught me exactly how these gatherings worked. Vanessa would dominate conversations. My mother would praise everything Vanessa accomplished. My father would discuss success, wealth, and networking opportunities. Ethan walked into that environment completely unaware. "Your family seems nice," he said while carrying a homemade pie into my parents' house. I nearly laughed. Give it time. The evening started pleasantly enough. Ethan charmed my grandmother within 5 minutes. He helped clear dishes without being asked. He listened more than he spoke. By every reasonable standard, he was wonderful. Then my father asked the question. "So what exactly do you do?" Ethan smiled. "I work in healthcare technology." "For which company?" my father asked. Ethan mentioned the company name. It meant nothing to me at the time. Apparently it meant nothing to my father either. "Are you management?" Ethan shrugged casually. "Something like that." Looking back, the answer was technically true. It just wasn't complete. Not even close. The conversation moved on. But later that night, I overheard Vanessa talking to my mother in the kitchen. "He seems nice." Vanessa's tone suggested she meant the opposite. "Very ordinary." My mother nodded. "Harper has always chosen practical people." Practical people. The phrase sounded harmless. Yet somehow it carried disappointment. Like practicality represented failure. Like stability wasn't enough. Like kindness wasn't enough. Months later, Ethan and I took a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. On the final evening, we watched the sunset from a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sky glowed orange and gold. Waves crashed below. The moment felt perfect. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Immediately, my heart stopped. "Ethan." He smiled nervously. It was the first time I had ever seen him nervous. "Harper Mitchell, you are the smartest person I've ever met. The kindest person I've ever met. And definitely the most patient person I've ever met." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "I was hoping you might spend the rest of your life with me." By the time he opened the ring box, I was already crying. Yes. The answer came immediately. Yes, absolutely yes. We spent the rest of the evening celebrating on the beach. Calling friends. Calling Grandma Eleanor. Laughing. Dreaming about the future. It felt like one of the happiest nights of my life. Then I called my parents. My mother answered first. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom." I could barely contain my excitement. Ethan proposed. Silence. Not happy silence. Not emotional silence. Just silence. Finally, she spoke. "Oh." My smile faded slightly. "Oh? Well." She cleared her throat. "That's unexpected." Unexpected. Not congratulations. Not how wonderful. Not we're happy for you. Unexpected. My father joined the call moments later. His reaction wasn't much better. "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked. "We've been together 3 years. Marriage is a big commitment." I stared at the ocean while listening to them. Something about the conversation felt wrong. Very wrong. The next day, Vanessa called. I hoped for enthusiasm. Instead, I received skepticism. So Ethan finally proposed? Yes. Interesting. I frowned. What does that mean? Vanessa laughed softly. Nothing. I just thought someone with his career might wait longer. There was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Dismissal. Maybe pity. Maybe both. When I hung up, Ethan found me staring at the hotel balcony railing. Everything okay? He asked. I forced a smile. Yeah. He studied my face. Your family wasn't excited. It wasn't a question. Ethan had always been good at reading people. Not really. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Their reaction says more about them than it does about us. At the time, I appreciated the reassurance. What I didn't realize was that my parents were already making judgments about a man they barely knew. Judgments based entirely on appearances. And eventually, those judgments would lead them to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The months following our engagement should have been some of the happiest of my life. In many ways, they were. Ethan and I spent evenings discussing guest lists, menu options, and honeymoon destinations. We toured venues. Compared budgets. Debated flower arrangements neither of us actually understood. Like most engaged couples, we were building a future together one decision at a time. The difference was that every step forward seemed to create new friction with my family. It started subtly. The first issue was the venue. Ethan and I fell in love with a beautiful working farm just outside Austin. Rolling green fields stretched toward the horizon. White wooden fencing surrounded the property. Large oak trees provided natural shade. The ceremony space overlooked a small lake that reflected the sunset perfectly. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't extravagant. It felt authentic. This is exactly what I imagined, I told Ethan during our second visit. He smiled. Me too. We booked it that afternoon. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. That excitement lasted approximately 7 minutes. A farm? Vanessa repeated during our family video call. Not exactly a farm. You literally just said it was a farm. My mother frowned immediately. I thought you would choose something more elegant. It is elegant. I pulled up photos on my screen. Look at these views. My father barely glanced at them. Wouldn't a downtown hotel make more sense? We don't want a hotel ballroom. Why not? I looked at Ethan sitting beside me. He simply shrugged. We both knew this conversation wasn't really about venues. It was about status. Everything with my family eventually became about status. Over the next several weeks, the criticism continued. The venue was too simple. The guest list was too small. The menu wasn't sophisticated enough. The decorations weren't impressive enough. Nothing was ever openly hostile. Just constant disapproval disguised as advice. One afternoon, I received a group text from Vanessa. Attached was a photo of an extravagant wedding she had attended in Miami. Crystal chandeliers. Marble floors. Ice sculptures. Guests dressed like movie stars. Her message read, "This is what a real luxury wedding looks like." I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then another message appeared. Are you sure Ethan can afford something nicer? The question hit harder than she probably intended. Not because of the money. Because of the assumption behind it. Ethan and I could easily afford a larger wedding if we wanted one. We simply didn't want one. Yet my family viewed simplicity as evidence of failure. Every choice had to signal success. Every event had to impress strangers. Every milestone had to become a performance. A month later, Grandma Eleanor visited Austin. We drove her to the venue on a sunny Saturday afternoon. The moment she stepped out of the car, she smiled. Oh, Harper. She slowly turned in a circle. This is beautiful. Relief washed through me immediately. You really think so? Absolutely. She pointed toward the lake. People spend their whole lives chasing things that look expensive. Then she gestured toward the sunset reflecting across the water. This actually looks meaningful. That sentence stayed with me. Meaningful. It perfectly described everything Ethan and I wanted. Unfortunately, meaningful wasn't a word my parents seemed interested in. As the wedding approached, their enthusiasm somehow decreased even further. My mother rarely asked questions about planning. My father constantly changed the subject whenever the wedding came up. Vanessa treated the entire event like a joke. During one family dinner, she actually referred to it as the Pinterest wedding. Everyone laughed except me. What's that supposed to mean? I asked. Vanessa smirked. You know. No. It's cute. The way she said cute made it sound like an insult. Ethan squeezed my hand beneath the table. A silent reminder not to engage. Later that evening, he found me sitting alone on the back porch. You're upset. A little. He sat beside me. Because of Vanessa? I nodded. I don't understand why everything has to become a competition. Ethan looked toward the stars overhead. Some people need other people to be smaller so they can feel bigger. The simplicity of the statement stunned me. Maybe because it felt true. As summer turned into fall, wedding plans accelerated. Invitations went out. RSVPs arrived. Vendors finalized schedules. Everything seemed to be coming together. Then, 6 weeks before the ceremony, my mother called. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice sounded unusually formal. Harper. Hi, Mom. Your father and I need to discuss something. My stomach tightened. Okay. Several seconds passed. Then my father joined the call. Neither sounded happy. Neither sounded excited. What's going on? I asked. My father cleared his throat. We've received another invitation. For what? Silence. Then my mother answered. The Langford Yacht Gala. I frowned. What is that? Vanessa's voice suddenly appeared in the background. Only the biggest charity event in Texas. Of course she was there. Of course she was involved. My father continued. Important investors attend every year. And? Another silence. A longer one. The kind that usually arrives before bad news. Then my mother finally said the words I never expected to hear. The gala is scheduled for the same day as your wedding. Everything inside me went still. So? My father's response came immediately. Too immediately. Like they'd already discussed it. Already decided. We probably can't attend both. I stared at the phone in disbelief. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood. Because surely no parents would miss their daughter's wedding for a networking event. Surely there was a limit. Surely family mattered more than status. Then Vanessa laughed softly in the background. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I realized exactly how this conversation was going to end. For several seconds after my father spoke, I simply stared at the phone in disbelief. The Langford Yacht Gala. My wedding. In my mind, those two events did not belong in the same category. One was a networking party for wealthy investors. The other was the day their daughter would get married. Comparing them felt absurd. Yet judging by the silence on the call, my parents were taking the comparison very seriously. You're joking. The words escaped before I could stop them. Nobody laughed. My mother sighed. Harper, please be reasonable. Reasonable. The favorite word of people asking someone else to accept something unreasonable. Mom. My voice remained calm. Are you actually considering skipping my wedding? Another pause. Then my father answered. This gala represents opportunities. I looked out the apartment window while trying to process what I was hearing. Opportunities for what? Vanessa jumped into the conversation before he could answer. Connections. Business relationships. Investments. Of course. Always connections. Always status. Always the next opportunity to stand near someone important. It's one evening, I said quietly. It's my wedding. Nobody responded immediately. That silence told me everything. Because if your attendance at your daughter's wedding is conditional, the decision has already been made. After the call ended, I sat on the couch for nearly 20 minutes without moving. Ethan eventually found me staring into space. What happened? I told him everything. Every word. Every excuse. Every justification. When I finished, he remained silent for several moments. I'm sorry. The sadness in his voice hurt more than the conversation itself. Maybe they're still deciding. Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Ethan looked at me carefully. He knew I didn't believe it either. 2 days later, the answer arrived. My mother called while I was reviewing wedding seating arrangements. The moment I heard her voice, I knew. Harper. Hi, Mom. She took a deep breath. Your father and I won't be able to attend. There it was. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just a decision. Final and complete. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. You're really doing this? Please don't make this harder. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because the sentence was unbelievable. They were skipping their daughter's wedding and somehow I was the one making things difficult. Mom, do you hear yourself? The gala is important. More important than your daughter's wedding? Silence. Then came the answer I would never forget. It's complicated. No. It wasn't complicated. That was the problem. It was actually very simple. They had made a choice. And I wasn't the choice. After we hung up, I called Grandma Eleanor. She listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end. Finally, she spoke. They're fools. The bluntness surprised me. My grandmother rarely criticized anyone. Grandma. No. Her voice hardened. I've spent 30 years watching them treat you like an afterthought. The statement hit me harder than expected. Because it came from the one person who had witnessed everything. You deserve better. Tears filled my eyes immediately. I know. Do you? She asked softly. The question lingered. Because if I truly believed I deserved better, why was I still devastated every time they disappointed me? The following weeks passed in a blur. Wedding plans continued. Vendors finalized details. Guests confirmed attendance. Meanwhile, my family behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. Vanessa posted photographs preparing for the yacht gala. My mother commented enthusiastically beneath every picture. My father discussed potential investors during family group chats. Nobody mentioned the wedding. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody seemed concerned about what their absence might mean. The only family member who called regularly was Grandma Eleanor. 3 days before the ceremony, she arrived in Austin carrying a small suitcase and a determination that could probably move mountains. I'm here early, she announced. Someone has to help. I hugged her so tightly she laughed. Careful, sweetheart. I'm 83, not indestructible. Her presence changed everything. Suddenly the house felt warmer. Less lonely. More like family. The night before the wedding, we sat together on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset. The venue looked beautiful. Strings of lights glowed beneath giant oak trees. Tables were arranged beside the lake. Everything was exactly the way Ethan and I imagined. It's perfect, Grandma Eleanor said. I wish Mom and Dad could see it. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Grandma squeezed my hand. Harper. I looked at her. The people who matter are the people who show up. That sentence stayed with me all night. The next morning, wedding day finally arrived. The farmhouse buzzed with activity. Florists arranged centerpieces. Musicians prepared equipment. Guests began arriving from across the country. Every few minutes someone congratulated me. Yet beneath the excitement sat a quiet ache. Because no matter how much I tried to ignore it, 2 empty seats waited in the front row. Seats reserved for my parents. Around noon, I checked my phone one last time. No messages. No calls. Nothing. Not even a simple good luck. By then, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how calm I felt. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for them anymore. If they came, they came. If they didn't, life would continue. Shortly before the ceremony, I stood alone near the bridal suite window overlooking the property. Guests filled the lawn. Laughter drifted through the air. Everything looked beautiful. Then I noticed something strange. Several black SUVs pulled into the parking area. Men and women carrying professional camera equipment stepped out. Large cameras. Lighting rigs. Audio equipment. Not wedding videographers. Something much bigger. Within minutes, an entire production crew appeared to be setting up around the venue. I frowned. We hadn't hired anyone like that. As I watched the activity below, Ethan suddenly appeared behind me. He looked unusually nervous. Not wedding nervous. Different. Harper, he said quietly. There's something I need to tell you. For a moment, I simply stared at Ethan. Behind him, the production crew continued unloading equipment around the venue. Large cameras. Mobile lighting rigs. Audio stations. The entire operation looked far too sophisticated for a wedding video package. What do you mean? I asked. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, something he only did when nervous. There are a few details I probably should have explained earlier. That sentence immediately concerned me. A few details? He laughed softly. Maybe more than a few. Before I could ask another question, someone knocked on the bridal suite door. A woman wearing a headset stepped inside carrying a clipboard. Mr. Cross? Ethan nodded. We're ready whenever you are. She glanced toward me and smiled. Congratulations, by the way. Then she disappeared. I looked back at Ethan. Who was that? He exhaled slowly. Part of the production team. Production team for what? For several seconds, he didn't answer. Then he reached for my hands. Harper, before I explain everything, I need you to know something. My stomach tightened. Okay. Nothing about us is a lie. The statement felt oddly specific. Ethan. I love you. His voice remained steady. Every conversation. Every trip. Every plan we've made. All of it is real. My confusion only grew. Then tell me what's happening. Ethan looked toward the window where the crew continued setting up. Finally, he smiled. Remember the healthcare company I work for? Of course. I don't just work there. I stared at him. What does that mean? He hesitated briefly. Then he answered. I founded it. The room went completely silent. You founded it? Yes. I blinked several times. The entire company? Yes. Somehow that still didn't fully register. Because over the years, Ethan had always described himself in surprisingly simple terms. He never talked about titles. Never bragged about accomplishments. Never mentioned money. Why didn't you tell me? He laughed softly. Because every time I tried, something interrupted us. That wasn't a real answer and we both knew it. Before I could challenge him, another knock sounded. This time, a man in a suit entered carrying a tablet. "We're live in 3 hours." Ethan nodded. "Perfect." The man left. My pulse accelerated immediately. "Live?" Ethan smiled apologetically. "Okay. That part definitely requires an explanation." I sat down slowly. Because I suddenly had a feeling my wedding day was about to become much stranger. Ethan pulled up a chair across from me. "About 2 years ago, a major network approached us." "Us?" "The company." He continued carefully. "They wanted to create a documentary series about innovation in healthcare." I frowned. "And?" "We've been filming for months." My mouth opened slightly. "Months?" "Mostly company operations. Research teams. Patient programs. Product development." He paused. The wedding became part of the story. For several seconds, I couldn't find words. "Our wedding?" "Yes." "A documentary?" Ethan nodded. "National television." My heart nearly stopped. "National television?" He laughed at my expression. "I know this sounds insane." Insane wasn't the word I would have chosen. By then, I felt like reality had quietly stepped sideways without warning. "How many people watch the show?" Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable answering. "A few million." "A few million?" "Around 4 million on average." I stared at him. 4 million people. 4 million strangers. 4 million viewers who would apparently be watching my wedding. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ethan's expression softened immediately. "Because I was afraid." That answer surprised me. "Afraid of what?" "That you'd see me differently." The honesty in his voice erased any irritation I might have felt. Because suddenly everything made sense. Ethan never hid success out of manipulation. He hid it because he didn't trust people's reactions. "How successful is this company?" I asked quietly. Ethan laughed nervously. "Harper. Just answer." Another pause. Then he did. "The last valuation was slightly over $3 billion. For several seconds, I genuinely wondered if I had heard him correctly. $3 billion. The number felt absurd. Unreal. Impossible. Yet the production crews. The suits. The television network. Suddenly all of it fit together. "You're a billionaire?" Ethan immediately shook his head. "Not exactly." Then he paused. Close enough that most people stopped listening after that point. I buried my face in my hands. Ethan Cross. The man who drove an old pickup truck. The man who preferred diners over luxury restaurants. The man my family described as ordinary. Somehow, the situation had become almost funny. Almost. "You realize my parents are going to lose their minds if they ever find out." Ethan smiled. "That possibility has occurred to me." A few hours later, guests began taking their seats. The ceremony area overlooked the lake exactly as we imagined. Golden sunlight reflected across the water. White flowers lined the aisle. Soft music drifted through the air. Despite everything I had learned that afternoon, one reality remained unchanged. My parents weren't there. 2 empty chairs sat in the front row. My mother had chosen a yacht gala. My father had chosen networking opportunities. Vanessa had chosen status. Meanwhile, Grandma Eleanor sat proudly beside Ethan's family, smiling at everyone who passed. When the ceremony finally began, I expected sadness. Instead, I felt peace. Real peace. For the first time in my life, I stopped wishing someone else would validate my happiness. I simply experienced it. Ethan waited at the end of the aisle. The moment our eyes met, everything else disappeared. The empty seats. The disappointment. The years of feeling second best. None of it mattered. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Personal vows. Happy tears. Laughter. Genuine joy. The kind that can't be staged. And somewhere around us, cameras quietly captured every moment. Afterward, guests moved toward the reception area while the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. I thought the surprises were finally over. Then Ethan took the microphone. He smiled at the crowd. Then at me. There's one more thing I'd like everyone to know. The production crew immediately turned their cameras toward the stage. My stomach tightened. Because judging by the expression on Ethan's face, the biggest surprise of the day hadn't happened yet. The reception had barely begun when Ethan stepped onto the small stage overlooking the lake. Golden lights glowed beneath the oak trees. Guests sat at beautifully decorated tables laughing, eating, and celebrating. The atmosphere felt perfect. Peaceful. Intimate. Exactly what we wanted. Then Ethan picked up the microphone. Before we continue, he said, smiling at the crowd, there's something I need to share. Immediately, every camera turned toward him. The production crew moved into position with impressive precision. Guests exchanged curious looks. Even I had no idea what was coming next. Ethan glanced toward me. Most of you know me as someone who works in healthcare technology. A few people nodded. What many of you don't know is that this wedding is being featured in the final episode of a documentary series that's been filming for nearly 2 years. A wave of surprised murmurs moved through the crowd. Ethan continued. The series follows the development of technology designed to improve medical outcomes for millions of patients around the world. Another camera operator stepped closer. Large monitors near the stage suddenly illuminated. A video began playing. Images flashed across the screens. Hospitals. Research laboratories. Engineers working late at night. Patients receiving care. Medical professionals discussing breakthrough innovations. Then Ethan appeared. Speaking at conferences. Meeting with government officials. Ringing the opening bell at a major stock exchange. Accepting awards. Signing partnership agreements. The audience fell completely silent. So did I. Because while I knew some of the truth now, I still hadn't fully understood the scale. The video continued. Headlines appeared across the screen. Revolutionary healthcare platform. Fastest growing medical technology company in America. CEO Ethan Kross leads industry transformation. Billion-dollar healthcare success story. I slowly turned toward Ethan. He smiled sheepishly. Almost embarrassed. As though becoming one of the most successful healthcare entrepreneurs in the country was a slightly awkward misunderstanding. The crowd erupted into applause. Ethan waited for it to settle before continuing. 3 years ago, I met a biomedical engineer at a conference. His eyes found mine immediately. She asked me a question nobody else thought to ask. Guests laughed softly. That conversation lasted 40 minutes. More laughter. And it completely changed my life. Suddenly, the giant screens displayed photographs of us together. Early dates. Road trips. Holidays. Small moments. Real moments. The kind that mattered. Ethan's voice softened. Everything I've accomplished professionally means very little compared to finding someone who makes me want to become a better person every day. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Around me, guests began wiping away tears as well. Even Grandma Eleanor looked emotional. Then Ethan smiled. Which is why tonight's episode is dedicated to Harper Mitchell Kross. The audience applauded again. Somewhere behind me, members of the production crew were smiling. Apparently they had been keeping this secret for months. After the speech ended, the reception resumed. Yet everything felt different now. Not because Ethan's success changed who he was. Because I finally understood how much of himself he had hidden from public view. Throughout the evening, guests approached us one after another. Some congratulated Ethan. Others discussed the documentary. Most simply wanted to celebrate. Nobody cared about wealth nearly as much as my family would have. That realization struck me repeatedly throughout the night. The people who genuinely mattered seemed interested in character. Not status. Integrity. Not headlines. Humanity. Not valuation figures. Around 9 o'clock, the documentary episode finally aired nationwide. Several large screens around the venue streamed the broadcast live. Guests gathered nearby to watch portions of it. The program told the story of Ethan's company from its earliest days. Tiny offices. Limited resources. Endless setbacks. Then came growth. Innovation. Success. Eventually, the narrative shifted toward our relationship. Interviews. Photographs. Memories. Moments from the wedding itself. The entire production felt surprisingly emotional. As I watched, I couldn't stop thinking about my parents. At that exact moment, they were somewhere aboard the Langford Yacht Gala. Surrounded by wealthy investors. Expensive suits. Exclusive connections. Exactly where they believed they belonged. What they didn't know was that the television screens surrounding them were likely broadcasting the same documentary. The same wedding. The same husband they dismissed as ordinary. Several hundred miles away, aboard a luxury yacht in Galveston Harbor, my parents were enjoying cocktails beneath crystal chandeliers when the episode appeared on one of the event's television displays. At least that's how Aunt Eleanor later described it. Apparently, a group of guests recognized Ethan immediately. "Isn't that Ethan Cross?" someone asked. Conversation stopped. Heads turned toward the screen. My father reportedly looked up first. Then my mother. Then Vanessa. At first, they thought it was a coincidence. Another Ethan Cross. Another wedding. Another documentary. Then my face appeared on the screen. According to multiple witnesses, the silence was immediate. Complete. Absolute. The documentary host began discussing Ethan's achievements. His company valuation. His influence within healthcare technology. His national reputation. Every new detail made the situation worse. Guests who had spent the evening networking suddenly became fascinated by the television. More importantly, they became fascinated by my family. Because eventually the documentary reached the wedding footage. Beautiful outdoor ceremony. Emotional vows. Happy guests. One glaring detail. 2 empty seats in the front row. The narrator mentioned them briefly. Several close family members chose not to attend. The statement lasted less than 10 seconds. Yet it was enough. Questions started immediately. Why weren't they there? Where were her parents? Didn't they support the marriage? Suddenly, my family's carefully managed image began developing cracks. Not because anyone exposed them intentionally. Because reality exposed them naturally. And according to Aunt Eleanor, the worst moment arrived near the end of the broadcast. The documentary host referred to Ethan as one of the most influential healthcare entrepreneurs in America. Then displayed an estimated company valuation exceeding $3 billion. The camera immediately cut to Ethan placing a wedding ring on my finger. At that exact moment, my parents realized something devastating. The wedding they called embarrassing. The groom they dismissed as ordinary. The event they abandoned for networking opportunities. Had just become the most talked about story at the entire gala. And for the first time in their lives, they weren't standing beside the person everyone suddenly wanted to know. They were standing outside looking in. The first phone call arrived before the reception ended. I didn't answer it. Mostly because I didn't hear it. Between the music, conversations, and celebrations happening around me, my phone remained buried inside my purse for nearly 2 hours. It wasn't until Ethan and I finally stepped away from the crowd to watch the sunset over the lake that I checked it. 23 missed calls. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My mother. My father. Vanessa. More calls from my parents. More calls from Vanessa. Then several text messages. Then more missed calls. Everything okay? Ethan asked. I slowly handed him the phone. He looked at the screen and immediately understood. They know. It wasn't a question. They know. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then another call appeared. Robert Mitchell. My father. The phone vibrated repeatedly in my hand. I watched it ring until it stopped. 10 seconds later, it rang again. You don't have to answer. Ethan's voice remained calm. I appreciated that. Because the truth was, I had absolutely no interest in speaking with my family. Not tonight. Not on my wedding day. Not after everything that happened. The phone eventually stopped ringing. Then another text appeared. Harper, please call us immediately. It's important. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because suddenly everything made perfect sense. For years, my accomplishments weren't important. My education wasn't important. My career wasn't important. My wedding certainly wasn't important. Yet somehow, now that Ethan's success was public knowledge, everything had become urgent. Very urgent. The next morning, Ethan and I woke up in a lakeside cottage we had rented for a few days after the wedding. Sunlight reflected across the water outside our bedroom window. Birds chirped in the distance. The entire world felt peaceful. Then I checked my phone again. 47 missed calls. I almost dropped the device. 47? Ethan asked. 47. My father alone accounted for 14 of them. My mother had called 17 times. Vanessa had called 16. There were voicemails. Text messages. Emails. Apparently my family had spent the entire night attempting to contact me. I listened to one voicemail while drinking coffee on the porch. Harper, sweetheart, call us back. My mother's voice sounded unusually emotional. There are things we need to discuss. Things we need to discuss. Another interesting phrase. Not we're sorry. Not congratulations. Not we missed your wedding. Just discussion. Problem solving. Damage control. The second voicemail came from my father. Harper, this misunderstanding has gone far enough. I laughed out loud. Ethan looked up from his coffee. Misunderstanding? I handed him the phone. Even he laughed. Because nothing about the situation was a misunderstanding. They skipped my wedding. That part was very clear. Around noon, Aunt Eleanor called. Unlike everyone else, I answered immediately. Good morning, Grandma. She laughed. Your family is losing their minds. That didn't surprise me. How bad? Worse than you think. I leaned back in my chair. Tell me. Apparently the Langford Yacht Gala had transformed into something resembling a public disaster for my parents. The moment guests learned Ethan's identity, everyone started asking questions. Not hostile questions. Curious questions. Which somehow made things worse. People wanted to know why my parents weren't at the wedding. Why they missed such an important event. Why they chose the gala instead. And what did Mom say? I asked. Grandma laughed again. Different things to different people. That sounded exactly right. At first she claimed there was a scheduling conflict. There wasn't. Everyone knew that. More laughter. Then she said you preferred a small ceremony. I shook my head. Also false. Very false. According to Grandma Eleanor, the explanations kept changing because none of them sounded convincing. Eventually, someone pointed out an obvious fact. If Ethan Cross was one of the most influential healthcare entrepreneurs in America, Why would anyone skip his wedding for networking opportunities? The logic collapsed instantly. My parents had spent years believing status mattered most. Then they accidentally skipped the highest status event available. The irony was almost impressive. The biggest surprise involved Vanessa. Apparently she had spent months bragging about the yacht gala. Posting photos. Discussing exclusive invitations. Talking about important connections. Then the documentary aired. Overnight, social media exploded with clips from the wedding. Ethan's speech went viral. Wedding photographs spread everywhere. Interview segments accumulated millions of views. Suddenly, everyone wanted to discuss our wedding instead. Not the gala. Ours. She hates it, Grandma said. I can imagine. No. Her voice carried amusement. You really can't. For years, Vanessa enjoyed being the center of attention. Watching attention move elsewhere was apparently a painful experience. By Monday morning, articles discussing Ethan's documentary appeared across multiple media outlets. Several featured photographs from the wedding. One image in particular gained significant traction online. Ethan and I standing together during sunset. 2 empty chairs visible in the front row behind us. Thousands of people noticed. Then started asking questions. The internet loves a mystery. Especially when wealthy families are involved. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to. Because curiosity finally won. Hello. Silence. Then my mother's voice. Harper. I waited. Why didn't you tell us? There it was. The question. Not why did we hurt you? Not how are you feeling? Not congratulations on your marriage. Why didn't you tell us? As though I had somehow committed the offense. Tell you what? About Ethan. I looked out across the lake. You never asked. Silence. Complete silence. Because that answer contained a truth nobody wanted to discuss. My family spent years judging Ethan without ever trying to know him. They looked at his truck. His clothes. His quiet personality. Then created their own conclusions. Now they wanted someone to blame for those conclusions. Preferably me. Harper. My mother's voice softened. Your father and I made a mistake. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. Then she continued. If we'd known. And there it was. The part that mattered. Not if we'd understood who he was. Not if we'd understood how happy you were. If we'd known. Known about the money. The success. The influence. Suddenly, the apology sounded very different. And for the first time, I realized my family wasn't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they finally understood what they believed they had missed. For the next several days, the calls continued. Not constantly. Not desperately. At least not at first. Instead, my parents adopted a strategy that felt strangely familiar. They acted as though nothing serious had happened. As though we simply needed a conversation to clear up a minor misunderstanding. My mother sent messages asking how the honeymoon was going. My father emailed articles about healthcare technology. Vanessa suddenly started liking years-old photos on my social media accounts. The effort felt so artificial it was almost painful. Because for years, they barely acknowledged my life. Now they wanted daily contact. The timing wasn't subtle. One evening, while Ethan and I were having dinner on the cottage porch, another email arrived from my father. This one was longer than usual. Harper, we'd love the opportunity to spend time with you and Ethan. There are several people we'd like you to meet. Some very influential contacts. I stared at the message before handing my phone to Ethan. He read it once and laughed softly. Influential contacts? Apparently. He handed the phone back. Your father still thinks networking is the solution to everything. That observation felt painfully accurate. The irony, of course, was that Ethan spent years avoiding people who only cared about status. Yet now my parents were trying to use status to repair the relationship they damaged because of status. A week later, Aunt Eleanor called with another update. Things are getting complicated. For who? I asked. Vanessa. That answer surprised me. Until then, Vanessa seemed more annoyed than affected. Apparently I was wrong. According to Grandma, Vanessa's fiancé, Trevor Langford, had been experiencing significant business problems. Several investments weren't performing well. A few partnerships had collapsed. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to create stress. Then came the documentary. Suddenly, every conversation surrounding the family shifted toward Ethan. Ethan's company. Ethan's success. Ethan's influence. Trevor hated it. Vanessa hated it even more. For years, she occupied the spotlight. For years, she was the impressive daughter connected to impressive people. Now the attention had moved. And unlike childhood competitions, this wasn't something she could easily reclaim. She asked about Ethan 3 times during lunch yesterday, Grandma said. What kind of questions? Investments. Partnerships. Potential opportunities. I closed my eyes. Of course. Even now, they couldn't simply see Ethan as a person. He was still a resource. A connection. An opportunity. Exactly the way they viewed everything else. A few days later, my mother finally stopped pretending. She called late Friday afternoon while I was reviewing research reports at home. Harper. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded unusually cautious. How's Ethan? There it was. Direct and immediate. No small talk. No transition. Straight to Ethan. He's good. Busy? Usually. A pause followed. Then she asked the question she had clearly been building toward. Would he ever consider mentoring Trevor? I actually laughed. Not because I intended to be rude. Because the request was so predictable. Mentoring Trevor? Just professionally. My mother rushed to explain. A conversation. Advice. Guidance. Translation, access. The same family that called my wedding embarrassing now wanted business opportunities from my husband. I don't think that's a good idea. Silence. Then disappointment. Genuine disappointment. Not because I refused. Because she expected a different answer. That realization saddened me more than it angered me. A few days later, Vanessa called. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet somehow it revealed more than months of family interactions. Harper. Her voice sounded softer than usual. Can we talk? We're talking. She laughed nervously. You know what I mean. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. Do you think Ethan would ever invest in a startup? There it was. Not congratulations. Not how are you doing? Not I'm sorry I mocked your wedding. Business. Again. Why? I asked. Trevor has an idea. Of course he did. I leaned back in my chair. Vanessa, when was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? Silence. Complete silence. Because we both knew the answer. Eventually, she changed the subject. Then ended the call shortly afterward. That night, Ethan found me sitting on the patio staring into the darkness. Family? He asked. I nodded. He sat beside me. Still trying? Very hard. Ethan looked thoughtful. Do you know what the strange part is? What? I don't think they're bad people. The answer surprised me. Really? He nodded. I think they're people who spent so long measuring value incorrectly that they forgot how to recognize it. I thought about that for a long time. Because it felt true. My parents weren't villains. Vanessa wasn't a villain. They were people trapped inside a worldview where success determined worth. Status determined importance. Connections determined value. The problem was that eventually those beliefs consume everything. Including relationships. 2 weeks later, the situation reached a turning point. My parents showed up at our house. Unannounced. Ethan and I had just finished breakfast when the doorbell rang. I looked through the window and immediately froze. Robert Mitchell. Linda Mitchell. Standing on our front porch. My father held a small gift bag. My mother looked nervous. Very nervous. Neither of them had visited in years. Yet here they were. Several states away from home. Standing outside my front door. "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked quietly. I stared at them for several seconds. For years, I dreamed about moments like this. My parents finally making an effort. Finally showing up. Finally choosing me. The problem was that now I wasn't sure why they were here. Was it because they missed their daughter? Or because they finally understood who her husband was? That question lingered in my mind as I slowly walked toward the door. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate for their approval anymore. Which meant whatever happened next would be very different from anything they expected. For several seconds, I stood frozen near the front door. On the other side of the glass stood my parents. The same parents who skipped my graduation. The same parents who mocked my wedding. The same parents who chose a yacht gala over one of the most important days of my life. Yet somehow, seeing them standing there didn't create the reaction I expected. There was no anger. No excitement. No desperation. Just calm. Ethan stepped beside me and gently squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I nodded. Then I opened the door. My mother immediately smiled. The expression looked nervous. Almost fragile. "Harper." "Mom." My father shifted awkwardly. "Hi, sweetheart." The word sweetheart felt strange coming from him. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. For years, most of our conversations revolved around expectations, achievements, and practical matters. Affection had always been rare. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. They both looked relieved. Within minutes, we were sitting around the dining room table. Ethan offered coffee. My parents accepted. Nobody seemed quite sure how to begin. Finally, my father placed the small gift bag on the table. "This is for you." I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph. My graduation photograph. The one from years ago. The one where I stood holding my diploma while Grandma Eleanor cheered from the audience. My throat tightened immediately. "Where did you get this?" My father looked down. "Grandma had a copy." Silence filled the room. Then my mother spoke. "We've been looking at that picture a lot recently." Something in her voice felt different. Less polished. Less defensive. More honest. "Why?" She swallowed hard. "Because we realized we weren't there." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my father exhaled slowly. "Harper, I don't think we've been honest with ourselves." I listened quietly. We spent years convincing ourselves that we were supporting the family. His eyes lowered toward the table. But the truth is, we were chasing approval. My mother nodded. Important people. Successful people. Wealthy people. She laughed bitterly. People who barely remember our names. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. They spent years prioritizing status over relationships. Then discovered that status offered very little comfort when relationships disappeared. My father continued. "When we saw the documentary." He paused. At first, I was impressed. That honesty surprised me. Then I realized something. He looked directly at me. The person I was most impressed by wasn't Ethan. Ethan raised an eyebrow. It wasn't? My father shook his head. No. He looked at me again. It was my daughter. The room became very quiet. You built a life without us. His voice cracked slightly. You became successful. Respected. Happy. He swallowed hard. And we barely noticed because we were too busy looking somewhere else. For the first time since they arrived, I believed he meant it. Not because the apology was perfect. Because it wasn't focused on Ethan. It wasn't focused on money. It wasn't focused on missed opportunities. It was focused on me. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. When we skipped your wedding, we thought we were choosing the more important event. Her voice trembled. Now I realize we missed the most important event of all. Tears filled my eyes. Not because the pain disappeared. Because someone was finally acknowledging it. Years of disappointment. Years of neglect. Years of feeling invisible. They couldn't erase that history. But they could finally stop pretending it didn't exist. A few moments later, my father surprised me again. We're not here to ask Ethan for anything. Ethan remained silent. No business opportunities. My father shook his head. No investments. No introductions. He looked embarrassed. Honestly, I think we've embarrassed ourselves enough. Even Ethan laughed softly at that. The tension in the room eased slightly. Then my mother asked the question she should have asked years ago. Are you happy? Such a simple question. Yet hearing it felt strangely emotional. Because nobody in my family had ever asked it before. Not really. They asked about achievements. Promotions. Salaries. Accomplishments. Rarely happiness. I smiled. Yes. And for the first time, I meant it completely. Not because my life was perfect. Because it was mine. Built on my choices. My values. My relationships. My father nodded slowly. Good. The conversation continued for several hours. Nobody solved everything. Nobody magically repaired decades of hurt. Real life doesn't work that way. Some wounds heal slowly. Some trust returns gradually. Some questions never receive perfect answers. But something important changed that afternoon. Honesty finally entered the room. When my parents eventually left, my mother hugged me tightly. We love you. The words felt sincere. Yet what surprised me most was my reaction. I appreciated hearing them. But I no longer needed them. For most of my life, I chased validation from people who struggled to give it. The wedding changed that. Watching my parents choose status over family forced me to confront a difficult truth. If your worth depends on someone else's approval, you'll spend your entire life waiting. The healthiest thing I ever did was stop waiting. Several months later, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan continued growing his company. I continued my work in biomedical engineering. Grandma Eleanor remained the strongest person in the family. Some things never change. My relationship with my parents improved gradually. Not perfectly. Gradually. Boundaries remained. Expectations changed. Conversations became more honest. Meanwhile, Vanessa faced her own journey. For the first time in her life, she experienced what it felt like when admiration disappeared. Surprisingly, that experience helped her grow. Not immediately. But eventually. Looking back now, people often focus on the documentary. The billionaire reveal. The national television audience. The yacht gala. The irony. But those details were never the real story. The real story was about value. My parents spent years believing success created value. Wealth created value. Status created value. Then they met Ethan. A man who possessed all three and barely cared about any of them. More importantly, they finally learned something about me. The daughter they overlooked for years already had value long before anyone saw her on television. Long before she married a successful entrepreneur. Long before strangers recognized her name. Value isn't created by attention. It isn't created by money. It isn't created by influence. It's revealed through character. Through integrity. Through how you treat people when there's nothing to gain. My parents called my wedding embarrassing. Then they saw my groom on national television. The funny thing is, the television never changed who Ethan was. It simply exposed who everyone else had been all along. And if this story taught me anything, it's this: the people who truly love you don't wait until you're successful to see your value. They recognize it long before the rest of the world does. Fortunately for me, the right people always did.